remembering that the world is an enchanted place, that everything around us is ensouled, it's alive with spirit. Magic is real and it belongs to all of us.
Hey guys, and welcome back to another coffee talk. Today is a regular length episode. Today I'm going to be interviewing the wonderful Celeste Larsen. She is an author. She wrote the book Heal the Witch Wound, and she also is a practicing witch. I made myself a nice lavender oat flower tea because the other thing is I am also feeling under the weather, so you'll have to forgive me. My ears are popped. I just downed a bunch of water so that my throat isn't too scratchy or froggy. And I'm also just feeling super run down. So I apologize in advance if I just sound different in today's episode, or if, you get the drill. You guys have all been sick before. So anyway, that's just my little prelude. I was able to get my hands on her book. She's sending me a physical copy, but I downloaded the audiobook like a week and a half ago, and I've been trying to listen to it as much as humanly possible every time I drive into town. And I've gotten about halfway through it, and it is very eye-opening. I feel very seen by a lot of the witch wounds that she has outlined in the book, some terminology that she uses, like hiding in the broom closet. And if you've been watching my channel or coffee talks or anything of that sort for a while now, then you'll know that I've dabbled with things like witchcraft, but I've always been super afraid to take the full plunge. So this conversation is going to be really cool for me and hopefully really interesting for you too. I would hope I wouldn't have to make this disclaimer, but I will anyway, just in case, that if witchcraft isn't your thing, or if you think down about it or anything like that, I would encourage you to keep an open mind and maybe listen to Celeste and hear her out before, drawing a line in the sand. Or if you already know that this just isn't your thing, then today's episode probably won't be for you. But if you are interested in witchcraft, if you're a practicing witch, or if you just want to have a nice, deep spirituality, animism, we're going to get into things like ancestors, healing the actual witch wound, divine feminine, all of that. This is going to be your episode. So let's dive in. This episode is brought to you by AccuBar. AccuBars themselves are plant-based protein bars packed with high-quality ingredients for both your body and your brain. If any of this is sounding good to you, then the sampler pack is a great way to try all AccuBar products and their flavors. That's 7 bars, 4 IQ Mix sticks, and 4 IQ Joe sticks. Refuel smarter with AccuBar's Ultimate Sampler Pack. All of the podcast listeners can get 20% off all IQ products, plus get free shipping. To get your 20% off, just text TALK to 64,000. Get your discount by texting TALK to 64,000. That's TALK to 64000. Message and data rates may apply. See terms for details. Hello.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you now. How are you doing?
I'm doing really well. How are you?
I'm good. I'm super excited to chat with you today. I did just give a little introduction before diving into our interview, our discussion today, but for the most part, I feel like it's always best to hear from someone's own words. Oh, is that your puppy?
Yeah, he's trying to say hello.
Oh, so cute. Yeah, if you just want to introduce yourself, give your name, you could talk about your book or just your passions, your interests, anything you think would be relevant.
Yeah, so my name is Celeste Larsen, and I'm a practitioner of earth-based and ancestral spirituality and magic. All right, want to say hi? Yep, this is this is my little guy. He had to
What's his
appear.
name?
Cooper.
So cute.
Yeah, he's a sweetheart. As I was saying, I'm a practitioner of earth-based and ancestral spirituality and magic, but really, in simpler terms, I'm a pagan witch. So I'm sure we'll get into a lot about what that means to me and what I actually am practicing on a regular basis. Um, but aside from that, yeah, I'm also the author of the book Heal the Witch Wound, and I have a feeling we'll dive into that as well.
Definitely. Well, before we get into all of the good questions, I always start off every coffee talk this way. I'm curious, if you were to walk into a cafe, what would be your go-to order?
I am an herbal tea girly. So yeah, I've got here some lemon balm tea that I added a little bit of lavender to. So that would be my go-to.
I love your mug, by the way. Is it a cauldron?
Thank you. It is. Yeah, Etsy fine.
Before we dive into your book, I just want to unpack a little bit more about your journey into things like spirituality, witchcraft, and animism. Like, how did you land here? How did you open this door? Was this something you were interested in since you were really little? Like, what was that journey like for you?
Yeah, I honestly, looking back at my life, have always been really into this kind of thing. I feel like I long before I had the terminology for it, like, I have always been an animist. I remember being a kid and just feeling that the world was a very enchanted place and that, you know, things were alive with spirit. Like, I would talk to the trees and like to my house and to the wind. And I feel like a lot of kids do those things. But then, like many people, as I grew up, I kind of moved away from those beliefs because I felt like they were childish or that people would think I was weird if I was talking to plants, which is a great practice that I have readapted, fortunately. But yeah, so it's something I have always been really into and very passionate about. And I feel like that's really what a lot of modern witchcraft is about, is remembering that the world is an enchanted place, that everything around us is ensouled, it's alive with spirit. And that's why magic works as a witch, when we're working with tools like candles or crystals or herbs or having a full moon ritual, what we're really doing is connecting with that energy, that web of energy that's alive in you and me and my dog and the nature outside. And that's why spells and rituals work the way that they do. At least that's how I see it.
That's such a cool answer. And it actually answers another question I was going to ask you about what you felt like the root of witchcraft and spirituality really is. But I feel like you really just answered that. I'm curious how you would define something like animism, solely because it was such an interesting term for me to learn, which you actually just taught me. Thank you for giving me the wording of it, because I was also very similar as a kid and felt that and still feel like sometimes I can hear the trees or just like feel them or sense them. So I'm curious how you would define animism and what it really means to you.
So animism is the belief or knowledge really that everything has a spirit, that everything is animated, so to speak, and not just humans and not even just animals and plants, but also things like stones or mountains or rivers or the moon or any body of water or like an entire forest, homes, buildings, all have spirit. There's individual spirits of the trees that make up that forest, but then there's like place spirits that live within that forest and kind of define the energy that you feel there. And I think so many people, even if they don't apply spiritual terms to themselves, they feel that, like so many people walk into a building or a certain place and they're just like hit with that energy.
Mhm.
And that's kind of the foundation of witchcraft, like we were saying.
So, how would you go about your day to day, incorporate things like animism or witchcraft or your spirituality? Like, what does that look like for you in routine and in practice?
So that's really the cool thing about witchcraft, in my opinion, is it really is all about merging magic with the mundane and kind of finding the magic in the everyday. For instance, something like your morning routine. Maybe you take a shower and you do your skincare. It can be just that, or it can be a ritual where you are calling upon the elements of water for its cleansing and purifying properties, and you're washing away what's not serving you and kind of seeing those stuck energy being washed away down the drain. And then you go out and you apply your skincare in a circular motion as you're calling in like magnetism and confidence for the day. And it's the same actions, but ultimately a very different result and like sets you up for such a different type of day. Even more simply than that, just recognizing that there's magic in the world and that there's spirits in the world, like saying goodbye to your house when you leave or hello. It's just a nice reminder that like you're never really alone, that there's like so many spirits around you that have your back and that you can connect with at any time if you'd like.
While we're recording this, I believe there's a super full moon coming up in 2 days. What would that look like? Do you do specific moon rituals or do you work with things like astrology at all? Like, how do you incorporate that kind of cyclic nature into your practice?
Yeah, so it kind of always varies. I feel out the energy of like what's happening for that lunar cycle. And Yeah, for this one, I'm definitely feeling very witchy. It's often known as the harvest moon because this is the full moon closest to the autumn equinox. So we've just passed the autumn equinox. We're like descending into the dark half of the year, um, where night is becoming longer than day, and of course we have Halloween coming up, which is connected to the old Celtic festival of Samhain. So a very witchy time of year for a lot of people. So, I'm not sure exactly what I'm gonna be doing for this full moon yet, but usually it looks something like sitting at my altar. I might do like a candle spell, so take candle and anoint it with some oil and herbs that correspond with the intention that I'm working with. Holding the candle while I'm thinking about that intention, just like really meditating, visualizing it, calling upon the element of fire, which is really associated with transformation and creation and energy. And like candle spells are great for rapid results because it's like a very, quick kind of burning energy. And so something like that, but it just depends.
Do you feel like your understanding and your practice of things like witchcraft has evolved over the years? And if so, how did you get started and where do you feel like you are now?
Definitely. My practice is really kind of always evolving, and that's also a great thing about witchcraft is you never stop learning and discovering new things. So like, I mean, monthly, if not weekly, I'm learning new things and kind of figuring out new things about myself. But one of the things that I would like to touch on is earth-based spirituality, it's just inherently like it's not a love and light only kind of path because that's not what nature is, like everything in the natural world is balanced. We have the light half of the year from the spring to autumn equinox, and we have the dark half of the year from the autumn to spring equinox. We have summer, we have winter, we have night and day, we have the new or the dark moon and the full moon. So by connecting with these energies in nature, it just really kind of teaches you that like that darkness is okay and it has things to teach us too. And that can be really healing like on a personal level because when you learn that darkness is just as natural and pure as light from nature, then you can kind of learn to get comfortable with that in yourself as well. So it's actually really helped me work through some like fears and limiting beliefs and those kind of like shadowy parts of myself that can be hard and scary to face. And so it's been really healing for me in that way.
It's actually such a perfect segue into talking about your book, which is called Heal the Witch Wound, which seems to be very in alignment with that whole the darkness, sometimes having to work through your shadow self or work through your wounds. So, what inspired you to write this book to begin with?
The witch wound has really been like the healing journey of my life. Even before I had, this knowledge of like what is the witch wound and even like what is witchcraft and animism and like these terms that we're using. I always really struggled with who am I as a person. I was like the kid growing up who I am one way with these people and I wear a different mask with these people. And like it was my worst fear when two different groups of people would come together and I would be like, who am I? I don't know how to act. And I think it's because I was just really out of touch with like my core personhood. And a lot of that is because, like, I'm kind of a weird person, and I felt really uncomfortable with that, through this process of, like of working through, like, the healing practices of healing the witch wound. I've learned that it's okay to be a weird person. It's okay to, like, do things that other people might scoff at or judge you for, such as talking to plants or, like, practicing witchcraft or identifying as a pagan, having nerdy interests, like whatever it is that you're kind of like not comfortable with publicly broadcasting about yourself, like it is okay and there's way more people out there that will accept you than, you might think. But I think that's really why this was such a like a big topic in my own lifetime, something that I had to kind of like learn and grow through. So, yeah, that's why I was inspired to write the book is I was like, I wish I had this book when I was like growing up or at any point in my life.
Right. Like create the thing that you wish you could read yourself type of thing.
Exactly.
There's so much valuable information specifically about the history of witches and the burning times. Like I found those chapters to be so, I mean, they're obviously very moving because they're heavy, but they're also so full of information. And I'm curious to know where you learned about it all.
Yeah, I spent a long time when I first started writing my book, like the first few months really were devoted to researching the history of the witch trials and taking notes because there's kind of a lot of misinformation about the witch trials out there. Especially a lot of people in North America don't really know the history of the European witch trials, which is a lot of what I focused on in my book. But yeah, really around like Salem, there's just so many like myths and misconceptions out there. So I wanted to do my best to summarize the very complex history of this period in time, and luckily, there are a lot of like scholars and historians who have really made this their life's work. And so in the bibliography section of my book, I include those resources for anybody who's interested. They usually are scholarly documents, so they're not written by practitioners for practitioners, but that's great in a way because you just kind of dive into like the history. You do miss some of the context from a modern practitioner's perspective because like historians tend to not really believe that anybody was a witch, so you have to keep that in mind, but there's a lot of authors out there who do write about the history in a lot of detail.
Yeah, that's so cool. And I think that's why I enjoyed your reiteration of the information because you were so good at balancing it and also giving such a balanced point of view for anybody that could be reading the book of like any gender, no matter your ancestral background, anything of that sort. And you also did a really good job in explaining the heavier truths of the burning times and the witch trials while also too being very considerate and really respectful. So it was definitely very eye opening. And it's right at the front of your book, too. So I feel like it dives right in. You don't hesitate. And then further into your book, I was so surprised how much I was resonating with a lot of the different symptoms that you explained of the witch wound. And I feel like a lot of people that will read your book will also resonate as well. Specific things like hiding in the broom closet, feeling like you need to hide your beliefs, feeling a fear of judgment or like downplaying it. Another one being, and this is a big one, I think, especially as someone that creates content online, and I'm curious if maybe you get this too, but people will come about and say like what you're doing or what you're believing or what you're practicing is dangerous or it's dark or evil in some way. And so for any listeners that might recognize those symptoms or have experienced that too, like what would your advice be to begin healing and reclaiming their own power and who they are, what they believe in, and yeah, if like witchcraft is calling to them, what advice would you give them to lean into it?
Well, there's so many individual practices that you could rely on to kind of move forward towards that goal, but ultimately what it comes down to is you have to put more stock in what you believe about yourself than what other people believe about you. Because if you're kind of wrestling with, like, "Well, how much do I share about my practices?" and you decide to open up to someone and they do approve, but you haven't really worked through that internalized, like, shame or fear or guilt, then their approval might not mean as much as you think it would mean. And conversely, if you have worked through that and someone, is saying what you're doing is evil or that you're crazy or whatever labels they might throw at you, but you feel like really secure in like the work that I'm doing is meaningful and it's powerful and I believe in this, then that sense of personal power can be really unshakable. And so ultimately that's the most important thing. Like I said, there's so many practices that can lead you towards that, but that's kind of ultimately what you're working towards.
And you identified as a pagan witch. So I kind of want to touch back on that. Can you explain what that is and like the difference of different types of witchcrafts and practices?
Yeah, so the term pagan is really an umbrella term. There's a lot of different beliefs that kind of fit under that, but generally speaking, pagan refers to being outside the scope of like the main religions of the world. Specifically, people who use this term tend to be really focused on pre Christian religions. So I'm very interested in the spiritual and magical practices of the places where my ancestors came from. So, Scandinavia, Ireland, the British Isles. most of Northern Europe, kind of scattered around. But yeah, so that's my definition of what paganism is to me, is really connecting to those ancestral practices, pre-Christian practices.
What has your experience been like connecting with your ancestors? And like, what are some ways that someone can connect to their own ancestors and their experiences, their wisdom, and even their wounds?
That's a really big part of my personal practice. Like, I keep an ancestor altar up year round, and it's like my sanctuary and my house. It's one of my favorite places where, whether I'm having an amazing day or a horrible day or anything in between, I can go sit there and light a candle and like pour some water or tea or sprinkle some herbs in an offering bowl and just call to my well and wise ancestors and then say whatever it is that I'm wanting to say. And I do really like feel their presence around me, and it often feels kind of like they're standing right behind me, which to people who haven't worked with spirits before, that might sound creepy or unsettling, but it's not at all. It's super positive and loving and protective energy, and just makes me feel very supported and safe. And it can be really as simple as that, but there's so many ways that you can continue to work with your ancestors from that point. Once you've kind of established contact with them, you can do divination, you can research your family history and reach out to specific ancestors. You can reach out to ancestors who maybe walked similar life paths to the one that you're walking now. So if there's an interest of yours, you can put out a call to ancestors who were artists or musicians or witches or healers, because we all have those ancestors in our lineage. Human history, modern humans go back 300,000 years. And so we all have healed and wounded ancestors in our lineage. And if you want to do work with wounded ancestors as well, that can be a very healing thing, identifying those limiting beliefs and patterns of behavior that have been passed down through generations, and identifying those things that maybe are alive within yourself that didn't actually originate within yourself, but stem from a traumatic moment that your ancestor endured or something along those lines, and breaking that cycle.
Okay, I have so many questions that could come from what you just said. I'm going to start with the first, but hopefully I won't forget the second. The first being, within your practice, you call upon your ancestors a lot. Do you think each of your ancestors was a completely different lived person, or do you believe in things like past lives? Could it be that your energy has reincarnated into this life? Like, what does that belief system look like for you?
All of the above. Like, I don't know more than anybody what happens when we die, but I think there are a lot of possibilities, and I kind of think, my own belief, I think that people have their own journey after they die, and so I've lost people in my life, and I have noticed that some of them, I can feel their energy after they're gone, and some people I can't. So I think maybe different things are happening to them. They've got different journeys ahead of them, whether it's, they're on to their next life or they're somewhere else. I don't really know, but I do think that some ancestors, for whatever reason, kind of stick around and remain available to us, and that these are the ancestors that we can connect with. And what's interesting is a lot of pre-Christian cultures believed that there was not just one part of the soul, and that's kind of how we tend to think about it today. It's like we have one soul and it goes one place after you die, but a lot of cultures believed that there were multiple parts to the soul, whether it was 3 parts or 6 parts or however many parts. And so one part of the soul might remain as energy that you still feel here on earth, and one part goes on to the next life, and one part can even, get passed down through the family line. So I don't know what happens, but I know that you can feel those energies.
Wow, that's so cool. I've never heard of that before, but that actually would make a lot of sense if our souls had multiple parts instead of just being one solo entity. My other question was going to be, because you've touched on the darker sides of witchcraft and magic and working with specifically earth-based magic. And then you also have touched upon, I just read over this part of your book, the the concept of like, yes, there are going to be darker sides to this as well. And so for anyone listening that's like, okay, is witchcraft, if I start doing or casting spells, am I opening myself up to like a demon or to bad energy? Or even if we're to include like ancestors that might not be healed, but maybe it wouldn't be a very great experience. I guess let's start there.
So, yeah, I guess the first thing I'll say is that, like anything in life, there are risks. And I think that's just something that you always have to keep in mind, literally, whether you're just walking down the road or you're practicing witchcraft. Like, there are things that can happen. There's no need to go overboard or be overly cautious when it comes to protecting yourself. Like, if you're getting in the car and you're driving somewhere, you drive a car that has airbags and you buckle yourself in. And so we have those same kind of practices in witchcraft that most of the time you're not going to need them, but it's good to have them in case you do need them. So practices like casting a circle around yourself, which is really just the practice of what it sounds like, setting up like an energetic barrier around yourself when you're at your altar or doing a spell or a ritual. And you can do this. You don't even need tools, as simple as like feeling your energy centered within your body and kind of seeing it going down your arm. And you can point your fingers and just walk or turn in a circle and see the circle forming on the floor around you, with the intention that your circle is protected and safe and shielded from any energies that you're not specifically calling in. There are many different ways that you can do that, but that's a simple one. You can do things like setting up wards for your home. And so many folk witchcraft practices are based on exactly that. Like, we have such a rich wealth of folklore about the witches of the past who buried witch bottles, which were things that would have, like herbs and nails and things to ward off harmful spirits. Nails, because iron was said to scare off a lot of spirits, and so they would, bury that below their front door or hang something above the threshold. You can do that throughout your house with different enchanted items blessed with the energies of protection. So there are a lot of precautions that you can take, but overall, it's the equivalent of like wearing your seatbelt. Hopefully, you're not going to need it, but you have it if you need it.
Have you ever, or is it a possibility to call upon, let's say, like your ancestors as a form of protection too? Like my papa passed away back in 2013, and I've had a couple people like that are either psychic or very spiritual that I've been around that have been like, whoa, like I can sense like your papa's energy around you. He's very, very protective. And I've always been curious about that as well. Like, is that something you would do too? Or is that something you would advise doing as a form of protection?
Absolutely. I think even if you don't have the names of specific ancestors, you can always call upon your well and wise ancestors to watch over you, because your ancestors have a vested interest in you. You're their living legacy and they want you to do well and they want you to succeed. So they're a very powerful spirit ally to have. Not the only one, there's other spirits that you can work with as well, deities, whatever kind of spirits you might be interested in working with. But having those friends on the other side, so to speak, who can watch your back and protect your home, definitely, if that's something that you're comfortable with doing, I think that's a great, really powerful practice.
This episode is brought to you by IQ Bar. IQ bars are the best, quick, brain boosting snack for wherever you are. IQ bars are vegan, they're gluten free, and they're low in both sugars and carbs, and every flavor from chocolate sea salt to peanut butter chip, which is my personal favorite. Not only that, IQ Bar also has something called IQ Mix, which is great for when you just want to rehydrate, but you aren't feeling like drinking plain old water, or right after a workout, or after a night out with friends. Or you can even drink one of their IQ Joes for energy or stamina if you have a super busy day. The IQ Mix that I just spoke of is a zero sugar drink mix that hydrates with electrolyte, improves your mood with magnesium, and can boost your clarity with lion's mane adaptogen. And on top of all the benefits, their flavors are amazing. They have blueberry pomegranate, blood orange, peach mango, again, my personal favorite, and lemon lime. And then the IQ Joe that I spoke of, if you're having a really busy day or you're just feeling really tired, it's a jitter-free instant coffee packed with 200 milligrams of natural caffeine. IQ Joe comes with 4 delicious flavors like original black, vanilla spice, cafe mocha, and toasted hazelnut. Refuel smarter with IQ Bar's ultimate sampler pack. That's 7 bars, 4 IQ Mix sticks, and 4 IQ Joe sticks. And now all of the podcast listeners can get 20% off all IQ Bar products, plus get free shipping. To get your 20% off, just text TALK to 64,000. Get your discount by texting TALK to 64,000. That's TALK to 64000. Message and data rates may apply. See terms for details. Okay, I'm going to read a little excerpt from your book. I hope that's okay, because I have a follow-up question. I feel like it'll help give a bit more context to it. It says, our earth and our people of all genders need this balance to be restored. We need the intuitive, nurturing, creative, sensual, collaborative, supportive energies of the divine feminine, which will in turn bring out the much needed light attributes of the divine masculine: action, accountability, courage, strength, responsibility, protection. Imagine the kind of world we would create if all of these energies were directed at healing the earth, healing our modern culture, and healing our people's bodies, minds, and spirits. I believe this form of healing begins with embracing the 3 great archetypes of the sacred feminine, often depicted in the form of a triple goddess, the maiden, mother, and crone. If we can befriend and honor these manifestations of femininity within not just ourselves, but also those around us and in the universe as a whole, we can begin the important work of healing the wounded feminine and reawakening the ancient bonds of sisterhood. So I feel like I have very vaguely heard of these terms before: the maiden, the mother, and the crone. But I'm curious, what does embracing and honoring those 3, what did you call them? The triple goddesses, what does that look like in practice?
Yeah, so I love that question. The maiden, the mother, and the crone are really timeless, ancient archetypes across so many different cultures. We see figures, whether they are heroes or goddesses, who appear in myths and folklore who kind of fit into these greater archetypes. Um, the idea of a triple goddess is also kind of an ancient thing, but I think in this specific form, it's a little bit more of a modern representation, which is totally fine. It's one that I and many people still resonate with, but I just wanted to share that. We can learn a lot, and our ancient ancestors really relied on myths to learn about the world and to learn about things like rites of passage or the dangers of the world or morals and ethics. Myths were so important and they were, told orally rather than being written down. And we, as a modern culture, I feel, have really forgotten how to learn these lessons from myths. Like they're so clouded by fantasy and things that we think couldn't possibly be real. So we forget that there is some real value and wisdom in them. But if we can kind of embrace the wisdom of myths by seeing our own lives playing out like a myth. So we all go through these phases of life um, as women, where we have our periods of time when we are embodying the maiden who is youthful and kind of bright-eyed and bushy-tailed and curious about the world and very open-minded and wants to learn everything and experience everything, and the mother, which is the archetype who I most identify with right now, although I am not a mother in the literal sense. But the mother really embodies the energy of creation and of being nurturing and generous and being a teacher and a caretaker. And that's something kind of as I moved out of my 20s into my 30s that I felt like I felt that shift energetically within myself while I was working on my book and some other big projects. I just felt like I was leaving behind some of my maidenhood, moving into that mother role. So it doesn't have to align specifically with age even, or with things like, menstruation or giving birth or anything like that. It's more about the energy that you're feeling in your life. Yeah, kind of seeing your life playing out like a myth and feeling, well, what does it feel like to embody the energy of the maiden? And even though I said I'm kind of in my mother era at the moment, I can still work with these other archetypes. Like if I am learning something new, that's a great time to call in those energies of the maiden and say, okay, like how does the maiden move through the world? What does it feel like when I am bringing these energies into my body? How does she go about learning something new? And yeah, it can really help you kind of navigate different situations in your life. Yeah, I think our ancestors would be quite sad to see the way that we think about those archetypes in our world today. Like when you consider how the maiden, the young woman is treated, being written off as naive or vain or self-centered or inexperienced, like her voice is overlooked by bosses and doctors, and then the way that mothers are treated, the way that older women are treated, it's just really shameful and toxic. And so just kind of loving those archetypes in ourselves and in others, the way that we see them showing up around us is it's really healing. Like it's subtle, but that's what magic is. It's subtle.
It's so empowering too. And is the would the crone be almost like the old sage, like wisdom? Is that the like spiritual
Yes.
how that would come about? Yeah.
Exactly, yeah, it's like the oldest stage of a woman in her life, and what's interesting is they kind of correspond with the phases of the moon as well, so the mother is corresponding with, like, the full moon, the maiden with the waxing stage, and which means, the moon's growing from new to full, and then the crone with the, waning stage, moving from full to new.
It's even interesting to think about how as like a society and in North American culture as well, but also just in social media, like there's so much emphasis on staying the maiden. But even still, like that's what I was thinking as you were describing that. But then you brought up a good point too. There's so much emphasis for women to stay in that maiden phase, that maiden energy, because once you become the mother or once you move into the crone, like you're no longer valued as much by society. But also you're so right that the maiden's voice is seen as like not not necessary, doesn't have anything to add, doesn't have anything to say or to innovate. So that is, I feel like there's so much there I have love to unpack. And I do have another question too that made me think of when you made reference to reawakening the ancient bonds of sisterhood. And you mentioned how our ancestors, like how you feel like they might be upset to see how we've let these myths go. I'm curious, like, what do you believe those ancient bonds of sisterhood were like? And how do you feel like they might be missing in modern day?
Yeah, I think that femininity in general was just looked at very differently than it is today, and we have a lot of evidence about that. For one thing, just the division of genders altogether was a lot different in the past, where like the division of labor was a lot more equal. And this is if you go back to like pre-agriculture era, like men and women were hunters and gatherers. They were all contributing pretty equally to society, but they were also respected for their unique gifts and strengths. And so one of those for women is the ability to birth life into the world. And I think that women really had very close bonds in that way. Like women gave birth in the company of other women with their midwives, and they would be together at the same time when they were menstruating, and they would have these rituals where they would be separated from the rest of the village. And even moving forward, there's a lot of evidence, which I didn't really know this until I was researching for my book, about the way that medieval women interacted, and like they had very close bonds of sisterhood. And the medieval era was an era with a lot of issues. Like there was a lot of persecution and judgment happening, but even so, like, I think women had very, very close bonds during this time where, like, they worked together and they raised children together and they socialized together. Like, I read these great texts about women meeting up at, like, the tavern without their husbands and how that was, like, what women would do. And even the term gossip used to just mean, like, women socializing. Like, it didn't mean, like, saying anything bad about other people. That kind of just got turned on its head as a way of like demonizing what women do and demonizing women getting together. So yeah, I think we've there's so much competition among women and like jealousy and comparing yourself to what other people are doing, whether it's how they look or what they're achieving or the relationship status. And I just think it's so important and so healing like, to reach out to other women and to show support for them, like, unconditionally. If these are your family and your friends and the people that you love, like, to just show that unconditional support and enthusiasm for their success and celebrating it like your own. Because 'Cause it is, when one of us is succeeding, like, we're all succeeding.
It's so true. And to kind of wrap up our conversation on the book in particular, what was your experience like with healing your own witch wound or wounds? And do you think it is something that can be fully healed, or is it an ongoing practice?
It's definitely an ongoing practice. In fact, in my book, I refer to it as the spiral path of healing because you do tend to come back to the same lessons again and again, with when it comes to the witch wound, if there are certain aspects of it that you are really struggling with, whether it's speaking your truth or being authentically seen or connecting deeply with other women, coming out of the broom closet, whatever it may be, there may continue to be triggering situations. Even for myself, just within the last year, my husband and I traveled back home to his hometown for a wedding, which is in the southeastern United States in a kind of a small town. And it was a lot of people I hadn't seen in a long time. And my husband, he's so supportive and was going around telling everyone, "Oh yeah, she's like such a successful witch now." And it was people who like I'd never talked to about my practice at all. And some of them just looked so stunned. And of course, I'm at the point in my life where I'm not hiding anything, but that didn't mean I wasn't triggered because I was.
That makes so much sense. And for anyone that would be relating to the scenario you even just described, or have related to some of the other witch wounds. I know that you did sort of touch on like the best part being feeling certain and sure within yourself. But even when you do feel that sense of like, oh, it's triggered again, and you do like you are very sure and certain in who you are and what you practice and what you believe, what do you do in those scenarios?
Sometimes I think it's honestly, it comes back to like you fake it until you make it. Like I am out of the broom closet. There's no coming back in at this point in my life. And there's gonna be moments that feel uncomfortable or that do, trigger you in different ways, but I trust in my journey so far, and I trust in the healing that I've done, and I trust in where I am as a person. So even when it feels uncomfortable, that's when growth happens, when you're uncomfortable, and so just the discomfort that you can tolerate, like, you don't have to if you're completely hidden and secretive about your practices, there's no need to jump all the way to, like, announcing it to the whole world, but just kind of, like, meeting your edge and pushing past it a little bit is all you have to keep doing if you want to open up more and you're struggling.
That's really good advice. I'm curious if, in your experience, especially ever since you've come out of the broom closet yourself, have you ever gone through phases where you felt a distance or any kind of like disconnect, or gone through times in your life where it was hard for you to feel connected to your practices and your beliefs? And if so, how do you navigate those situations?
Yeah, of course, I think everybody probably does, and what's interesting is, again, this kinda comes back to, like, the seasonality and the fluidity of the natural world. We all are affected by those cycles, we're all affected by the changing of the seasons and the 24-hour clock, and as a woman who menstruates, my body's also on a roughly 28-day hormonal cycle. So my energy and my motivation is constantly ebbing and flowing. As I mentioned, right now in the dark half of the year is when I am feeling like my most witchy, and I'm wanting to meditate and do divination and spend time at my altar every day, and it comes really easy to me. But there are other times of the year when I would have to use more force on myself to get myself to show up in that same way and have that same depth in my practice. And I've done that, but at this point, I don't really think it's necessary, like if I'm not feeling it, why force it? That's like forcing it to snow in the summer. It just is kind of going against what my body wants to do. And spirituality and magic are lifelong practices. Like there's really no rush. There's no urgency. You can't learn or do it all in a week or a year or even a lifetime. So it's okay, I think, to have those periods of stagnation. They might be important, and you might see that as time passes because I think I think people usually do find their way back to their practices. Like it is like this, and that's okay.
That makes a lot of sense. I do feel like too, even in my own experience of times where I felt a little distance from my spirituality, coming back to it, it almost like reignites that passion and you learn more from that time off. It's like giving your brain and your spirit and your soul some space to absorb new information and think in new ways. So I'm curious, like anyone that's listening right now and they want to start out on a similar path or start leaning more into witchcraft or connect to their spirituality, or maybe they felt really connected to your examples of animism, like obviously your book is a great resource to get started, but what other areas or what guidance would you give to somebody who is really, really enjoying this conversation, really passionate and wants to jump in?
I would say follow that spark, like whatever it is that is feeling most alive for you. If you're really wanting to explore astrology or animism or like traditional witchcraft, divination, like I was saying, like you can't learn it all in a week. And I think a lot of people who are newer to the path of witchcraft get really overwhelmed because they want to learn it all in a week. Like there are so many amazing books and Instagram accounts and YouTube channels out there who teach about this kind of stuff. And so it can be a little overwhelming when you look and see how much other people are doing and how much they've learned. Like you want to be on that same level, but you'll get there. So just pick something for now. Pick whatever is calling to you. So if you're interested in animistic witchcraft, find books that talk about that. Find one or find one Instagram account and start learning from that. And that path will lead you to others. And just be patient with yourself.
To conclude our conversation today, I'm going to give you a couple little rapid fire questions, if you don't mind, solely because I feel like this helps get really down to the soul, the core of somebody. The first being, what is a quote that you try and live by, or is it one that you come back to often?
So I picked a pretty nerdy quote for this one, but I do come back to it all the time. It's from The Lord of the Rings, and it's a conversation between Frodo and Gandalf. And if you're someone who's never seen Lord of the Rings, I'm so sorry, it's not going to make that much sense. But Frodo is talking about how he wishes the ring had never come to him, and he wishes that they weren't going through these dark times. And Gandalf says, you know, so do all who see these dark times, but that's not for us to decide. This is the main quote that I wanted to share is all we have to decide is what to do with the time that is given to us. So I love that quote because I just think it's true, like in so many situations. We're going through rough years here on Earth recently, and maybe we wish we could have been born in a different time. That's not for us to decide, but we do get to decide how we show up every day with whatever amount of time we have here.
Oh, I love that quote. Okay. Do you believe that we are the only source of intelligence or living beings in the whole universe?
Oh, definitely not. No, not even on this earth. Yeah, so I won't dive too deep into my answer for that because we could have a whole episode about that, but in short, no, definitely not.
Okay. Like, is it like a multi-dimensional thing, or now I want to pick it apart a little bit, but I'm just curious.
Yeah, I mean, like all of the above. So of course there's the animism. I think that all of the spirits here on earth have things that they can teach us. They have their own intelligence, their own wisdom. Definitely believe in different dimensions, different worlds that are kind of parallel to our own, like the other worlds, the spiritual realm where ancestors and deities reside, and then aliens too, all of the above.
Okay, love that answer. And if you could give one message to the world or to anyone listening today, what would it be?
I would say magic is real and it belongs to all of us. So claim it as your birthright because it is, and don't give up that birthright just because someone else thinks you should. It's not their life, it's your life. So make it magical.
That's perfect. Okay, well, thank you so much. This was such an enlightening conversation. It was so nice to be able to talk with you and to pick apart your brain and hear your beliefs, your practices. I really appreciate you feeling safe to come do so and feeling open to giving me your time today. And of course, like any of your resources and your book will all be listed in the description. So anyone listening that's interested can check you out. You also have a beautiful Instagram. I was just looking at it the other day. I saw that you also, it was one of your pinned posts, I believe, but you live in Ireland now, right?
I do, yeah, I moved here, about a year and a half ago.
And are you liking it?
Oh, yeah. What's not to like? I absolutely love it. I mean, it's beautiful. It's, like, super rainy and windy outside right now, but even that is really cozy, you know?
Thank you so much for coming. It was such a nice opportunity to get to chat with you.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate it, and it was great chatting with you.
Every time I do a coffee talk podcast, I'm always so inspired by the people that I get to bring on the show. And all I want to do right now is really go lean into all of my own spiritual practices that I feel like I've been so not hush hush about, but even just like that I've always been walking a line with, feeling like I wasn't allowed to fully embrace. And so that was such a cool conversation. I definitely feel very empowered. I loved everything Celeste had to say. Again, I'll leave all of her information, including her book, in the description notes. Definitely be sure to check it out. Every conversation, every interview I'm able to have, I just get so inspired by it. And I love bringing new souls onto the podcast. So if there's anyone else you guys want to see, be sure to let me know. You can come on over to YouTube if you're just listening today, or if you're already here, drop it in the comments below. Or if this episode brought up any thoughts for you, anything you want to share on this subject matter, definitely feel free to do that too. And yeah, without further ado, I'm going to close this down because I am, again, not feeling so great. So I need a nap. Cheers, everyone.